The glass walls of the Thompson Academy executive suite felt cold. Elara Vance, CEO of the thriving private school chain, stood overlooking the city. She was wrapped in an armor of sharp-tailored silk. Below her, the quarterly report was projected onto the sleek conference table, a fortress of data. The numbers were beautiful. They were irrefutable. Attendance 98.5%, graduation rate 100%, student satisfaction outstanding. Every single metric was a perfect climbing curve. Elara had built this empire on precision, on performance, on unquestionable statistical success. She believed in the sanctity of the data. The success felt absolute, untouchable. The fluorescent light overhead was brilliant, almost sterile. It polished the mahogany and the steel, casting a deceptive glare over the entire room. It was the light of complete control. The polished surface of her private desk was interrupted by the sudden low vibration of the burner phone. It was cheap plastic, a jarring presence in the opulent office. Elara hated using it, but it was the company's only true anonymous feedback line. The screen lit up with a single brutal text: "Your metrics are lies built on silence. Come look where the lights don't shine." Elara froze. The air conditioning hummed a lonely, mechanical sound. That phrase, "built on silence," hit her like a physical blow. It sliced through the confidence of the 100% graduation rate. A memory sharp and unwelcome flashed behind her eyes, the tight knot of fear in her own stomach, as a child trying to speak up in a system that preferred quiet conformity. She had been that child once. The vulnerable one. The one the system ignored. She walked to the window, the bright sun reflecting off the glass with a merciless glare. Was she now the architect of the shadows she'd once feared? The doubt was heavy cold. It was the moment the fortress of data began to crack. Elara knew the numbers could lie, but silence always told the truth. And someone had just broken theirs. The change was absolute, a deliberate act of shedding armor. Elara removed the heavy gold wedding ring, the one that symbolized her success. She unclasped the Rolex, a weight of expectation that now felt suffocating. Her custom-tailored suit was swapped for a faded cotton cardigan and practical worn-in sneakers. Her identity was being stripped down to the vulnerable core. She drove her modest sedan, intentionally chosen, to the inner-city campus. The school parking lot was concrete and stark, smelling faintly of stale exhaust and cheap cafeteria food. In the small, dimly lit faculty washroom, Elara faced the mirror. She pulled her hair back severely and pinned a cheap, brittle plastic name tag to her chest. E. Vance. The name tag was light, almost flimsy, a terrifyingly fragile shield. She was no longer the CEO who commanded millions. She was the sub, a temporary, easily dismissed ghost. Her last action was a silent, solemn vow. No exceptions. She had crossed the threshold. The cold, heavy silence of the school hallway swallowed her whole. The school hallway was a jarring mix of loud, frantic student chatter and the flat, institutional silence of the administrative wing. Elara moved with the quiet neutrality of a professional observer. She knew the map of this building intimately, but the air felt foreign, thick with unspoken tension. As she passed the counseling office, the sound hit her. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, a desperate, choked sobbing. It was the sound of a small boat taking on water far from shore. Elara paused, her heart immediately abandoning the cool logic of the boardroom. Through the narrow gap under the door, she saw them scuffed small sneakers shaking slightly. She could smell the metallic tang of fear and unshed tears. The crying was not standard schoolyard disappointment. It was a visceral, painful sound of terror, the sound of someone whose emotional defenses had completely collapsed. Elara knocked once, softly. The sobbing stopped, instantly replaced by panicked, scrambling silence. She introduced herself simply as Miss Vance. The student, Liam, 13 years old, finally emerged. His face was blotchy, his eyes red-rimmed and guarded. He hadn't been truant. He'd been hiding from his class, curled up on the cold tile floor. He whispered the name, Ms. Thompson, his homeroom teacher. Liam hadn't misbehaved. He had merely pointed out a small, verifiable error in the teacher's projected grade spreadsheet. That simple act of honesty had triggered a campaign of isolation. What level of malignancy could turn a minor correction into a personal war against a child? Elara felt the first stirrings of cold, controlled fury. The perfect metrics had lied. This was the truth. In Miss Thompson's classroom, the air was heavy with forced compliance. Elara, now merely the sub, sat near the back, observing the battlefield. She was accustomed to making decisions that shifted millions. Here she couldn't even move a desk without permission. The weight of her stripped authority was a physical ache. Ms. Thompson was a study in controlled condescension. She wore crisp, expensive clothing that seemed out of place among the faded textbooks. She moved with the entitled swagger of an unchallengeable tyrant. When Elara, forgotten in the corner, tried to offer a minor teaching suggestion, Thompson cut her off with clinical precision. "Thank you, Miss Vance, but we adhere to established methodologies here. Your role is primarily custodial." The dismissal was absolute, public, and swift. Elara felt the sting of being an outsider, an easily disposable cog. She realized this. Power dynamic was the root of the problem. Thompson treated her own CEO, albeit disguised with the same contempt she directed at the vulnerable students. Elara could not defend Liam. She could not speak. Her only tool was to sit watch and endure the suffocating silence of the powerless. The lesson was nominally on American history, but the real subject was control. Ms. Thompson stood by the projector, her voice smooth and pedagogical, yet edged with subtle malice. She scanned the room, her gaze resting on Liam. She posed a question about a complex constitutional amendment, one clearly outside the curriculum for that day. She knew the answer was inaccessible to him. "Liam," she asked with a practiced saccharine smile, "perhaps you can enlighten us." "No, oh dear." She didn't wait for his struggle. She simply sighed a sound, calculated to carry radiating disappointment. "Perhaps you should spend more time studying and less time staring out the window, Liam. Some students just don't have the focus required here." A few students tittered nervously. Elara watched Liam's reaction. He didn't argue. He didn't even look up. He simply physically shrank his shoulders, pulling inward, his head dropping. It was a practiced reflex of surrender. Elara realized this was not education. This was a repeated choreographed assault on a child's confidence. The silence in the room wasn't respect. It was fear. Elara felt the cold, hard logic of the situation click into place. This wasn't random cruelty. Ms. Thompson wasn't attacking Liam because she disliked his personality. She was attacking his performance data. The school's public-facing metrics, the perfect curves Elara had celebrated, required a controlled environment. The system was designed to reward compliance, not curiosity. Elara watched Thompson hover over Liam's digital worksheet. She was not offering correction. She was hunting for errors. Thompson needed a designated outlier, a justifiable reason for a lower score to validate the necessity of her rigorous standards. Elara realized that the entire highly successful system was built on a cruel, inverted principle. Thompson was using the official grading scale as a weapon to silence critical voices and maintain her facade of control. Liam's integrity was a threat to the school's stellar public image. The final bell shrieked a jarring metallic relief. As the students burst into the hallway, A chaotic wave of noise and energy, Liam remained small, frozen by his locker. The simple mechanism had jammed again. Elara knelt her knees, hitting the cold institutional tile. She worked the lock, the cheap metal resisting her efforts. Their heads were close. She could smell the faint scent of fear and old textbooks. As the lock finally clicked open, Liam whispered, his voice barely audible above the student traffic. "Please, Miss Vance. Don't believe what she writes about me in the reports." He gestured vaguely toward the principal's office. "She tells the counselor I have attitude problems." The words were a devastating weight. It wasn't just his grades Thompson was attacking. It was his character. Elara looked into the boy's eyes, a vast, painful ocean of loneliness. She knew she couldn't offer comfort. She could only offer silent resolve. What depths of malice would motivate a teacher to systematically destroy a child's internal narrative? The answer, she knew, lay hidden in the system's core. The employee break room smelled sharply of scorched coffee and microwaved desperation. Elara spotted Mr. Chen, the PE coach, sitting alone at a plastic table. His large frame, built for physical command, seemed to shrink beneath the low ceiling. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He was just staring, his eyes empty. The weight on his shoulders was visible. Elara chose the chair opposite him, moving with quiet intention. She didn't talk about sports or lesson plans. She simply said, her voice low, "The perfect metrics. They feel heavy, don't they, Chen?" His reaction was slow, visceral. His head tilted up, and his eyes, honest, tired eyes, locked onto hers. He didn't deny it. He gave a single, slow nod of resigned assent. That gesture confirmed everything. Chen admitted that Ms. Thompson was the unofficial sheriff controlling the 8th grade flow. He described the culture questioning the adjusted behavior reports was a professional death sentence. Elara understood fear was the true administrative tool. She had to breach his terror. "I just started here," Elara murmured, "but I see a good man trying to hold the line." Chen finally leaned forward, the muscle in his jaw twitching. The truth was burning him alive. Elara knew the next step was to win his trust, turning his fear into necessary action. The school library was a sudden, deceptive pocket of quiet. It was too quiet. The air smelled of old paper and dust, not the hopeful, fresh scent of new books. Miss Lee, the school librarian, was busy in a corner, methodically packing heavy cardboard boxes. She looked small, defeated. Elara moved toward her, noting the titles Ms. Lee was systematically removing from the shelves, books on social justice, emotional literacy, and topics encouraging critical thinking. They were being shipped out. Lee spoke in hushed, careful tones, her eyes flicking toward the security camera near the door. She confirmed Ms. Thompson's internal directive. Thompson had labeled these crucial, high-interest topics as distractions that led to unnecessary student focus. "I fought it," Lee whispered, her anger tightly contained. "I argued these are the books our students need to navigate the world." Her reward was swift and brutal. Her tiny budget had been decimated, and her contract was currently up for urgent review. She had a son entering college next year. The fear of job loss, a cold economic terror, was the true enforcer of the school's warped policy. Elara realized the system wasn't just controlling grades, it was suffocating knowledge itself. Working on Saturday morning, the school was silent, the silence broken only by the low hum of the servers. Elara, using the access granted to her highest corporate title, burrowed deep into the administrative annex files. The public-facing system, the one she used to review quarterly, was a facade, gleaming and spotless. The internal server was a swamp. She searched for Liam's name. Every formal complaint, every concern raised by a teacher or a parent about unfair grading had been diverted. She found a specific hidden folder buried deep in the system labeled innocuously, "Pending Resolution." This folder was not a waiting room for justice. It was a digital burial ground. Every inconvenient truth was routed here. She found dozens of complaints, all tagged with an automated note, moved to archival review. No investigation, no follow-up, just bureaucratic murder. Elara felt the cold certainty settle over her. The system was engineered not to fix problems, but to systematically extinguish the evidence of its own failure. During a late afternoon faculty briefing, Ms. Thompson took the floor. Elara, pencil in hand, documented the performance. Thompson wasn't talking about curriculum. She was giving a masterclass in weaponizing language. She spoke about students who require excessive handholding and parents who mistake entitlement for advocacy. Her language was clinical, almost academic, but the effect was toxic. She actively positioned her own cruelty as necessary rigor. Elara watched her colleagues. Their faces were passive, intimidated. Thompson was not merely bullying students. She was recruiting the compliance of her peers. She fostered a culture where empathy was weakness and silence was survival. The system was corrupted not only by bad actions, but by the normalization of toxic rhetoric. The tension was suffocating. Later that afternoon, Elara found Mr. Chen waiting near the locker rooms, ostensibly tidying equipment. His eyes flickered nervously, constantly scanning the empty hallway. He approached Elara quickly, and with a quick, desperate motion slipped a small, warm USB drive into the pocket of her cardigan. The action was furtive, almost painful. "Emails!" he whispered, his voice cracking. "They prove the counseling hours are fake. They prove she's been targeting me for weeks." He gripped her arm, his large hand trembling. "If they trace this, I'm fired. I'm ruined. You have to promise me, Miss Vance. You have to use this. You have to end this." Elara's own hand instinctively covered the drive in her pocket. The weight of the tiny device was immense. The fate of two innocent men, a child and a teacher, now rested entirely on her ability to maintain her lie. The air in the faculty lounge had turned thin and hostile. Ms. Thompson, usually aloof, had begun to observe Miss Vance. The interest was not benign. It was the cold scrutiny of a predator. Elara, in her drab cardigan, had become too quiet, too meticulous. She asked simple questions that seemed to carry complex subtexts. Crucially, she spent unauthorized time with the problem students, especially Liam. Thompson cornered Elara near the staff lockers. The hallway was momentarily empty. Her voice was low, smooth, and laced with menace. "You're new here, Miss Vance," Thompson said, leaning slightly closer. Her perfume was sharp, expensive, and suffocating. "You seem to be taking a rather personal interest in the 8th grade flow. We have established protocols. You need to adhere to them. Keep your head down." The message was a clear, direct threat. "Stop investigating, or you will be removed." Elara felt the heat rising on the back of her neck. The game had escalated. She was no longer just an observer. She was a target. She had to accelerate her timeline before her cover and the futures of the students were completely compromised. The school on Saturday night was a massive, silent tomb. The silence was unnerving. It pressed in, broken only by the low mechanical drone of the ventilation system. Elara, using a seldom-used corporate override code on a back service door, slipped inside. She navigated the darkened hallways, guided by the dim wash of emergency lighting. The air was thick and cold. Her footsteps, soft on the industrial carpet, echoed with impossible loudness. She was focused on the administrative wing. The goal: access the internal schedule and documentation before Ms. Thompson could shred the evidence. Elara reached the filing room. She quickly photographed the master schedule, revealing how Mr. Chen's hours were systematically gutted for the next quarter. Suddenly, a metallic, chic sound cut through the silence. The distant sound of a janitor's cart rounding a corner. Elara froze, adrenaline flooding her system. She pressed herself against the cold wall, her breath catching in her throat. She could hear the faint, rhythmic squeak of the cartwheels approaching. She was not alone. Elara pressed her body flat against the cold, gypsum wall. The rhythmic squeaking of the janitor's cart slowly receded down the adjacent hallway, a moment that felt like an eternity. She was safe for now. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the USB drive from Mr. Chen. She connected it to her secure corporate phone, a risky move. The drive contained a pre-recorded conversation. The audio began Ms. Thompson's voice, smooth and arrogant, speaking to the regional director. The words cut through the silence of the empty school like broken glass. "I have to hit those retention numbers or my bonus is gone," Thompson complained. "I don't care if Liam's application gets ruined. It's a line item. It's a necessary failure." The chilling realization was immediate and brutal. The destruction of Liam's future was not collateral damage. It was a calculated business expense. Elara felt a surge of cold, focused fury. The system she had built was literally monetizing human suffering. She had the proof. Now she had to stay alive long enough to use it. Elara knew the clock was running out. Thompson's suspicion was a tightening knot. To survive the final hours, Elara had to become the very thing she despised, the lazy, incompetent substitute. In the faculty lounge, she made sure to complain loudly about the poor pay and the excessive paperwork. She forgot to turn in an attendance sheet, earning a sharp public reprimand from a secretary. She deliberately fostered the stereotype of the disposable temp. This charade was agony. Every sigh she faked, every low-effort performance she delivered was a betrayal of the dedicated teachers she knew existed. It was a cold, necessary sacrifice of her own professional pride. She had to look completely harmless, utterly inconsequential to the powerful forces she was about to dismantle. Elara tracked Ms. Thompson's vehicle data using the high-level corporate security logs she still commanded. The destination was not a home or a school event. It was a secluded, high-end downtown cafe, a place of hushed velvet, low brass lighting, and expensive silence. The air outside smelled of rain and distant exhaust. Elara arrived first, moving like a phantom. She secured a discreet corner booth shielded by a large, ornate fern. She felt the cold reality of her position, an invisible CEO waiting in ambush. Thompson soon entered, followed by Mr. Miller, the regional director. Miller was slick, arrogant, encased in a suit that spoke of unnecessary wealth. Elara recognized the type instantly, the pure embodiment of the toxic, metrics-obsessed corporate culture that had infected her schools. The two settled close, their voices immediately dropping to conspiratorial murmurs. The scent of their expensive perfume and cologne, sharp and suffocating, seemed to fill the small space. Elara's adrenaline spiked, cold and chemical. The periphery was gone. She was facing the systemic source of the rot. She smoothly activated the concealed recording device beneath the table. The silence between them felt loaded, heavy with corruption. The recording device beneath the table was Elara's only lifeline. The voices of Thompson and Miller were now tight-focused, discussing pure commerce. They weren't speaking of children. They were speaking of commodities. Thompson confirmed her strategy. She was systematically reclassifying poor grades, the legitimate failures of her teaching methodology, as incomplete or administrative holds. This tactic allowed her to push the legitimate failures into the next quarter, artificially inflating the current term's success metrics. Miller chuckled, a dry, grating sound that scraped Elara's nerves. That's why you're worth your salary, Thompson. Creative accounting. The board sees perfect numbers, we get perfect bonuses. It's a clean cycle. Elara felt the cold, hard certainty of the betrayal. The data she had built her entire career on was merely a beautifully designed lie created to maximize executive bonuses. The entire foundation of the Thompson Academy system was not integrity, but calculated fraud. The conversation turned sickeningly personal, revealing the moral void at their core. They began discussing the students who threatened the facade, the liabilities. Miller's voice was utterly devoid of empathy, cold and clinical. That Liam kid is a liability. His grades and behavior reports are too messy. You need to close his file fast. Thompson complied with disturbing ease. He's the perfect target. No guardian to fight back. No money for a lawyer. We can put all the behavior problems on him. He'll be out of the system before the semester review. Elara's hand resting on the table tightened into a fist. The rage was no longer cold. It was a protective, white-hot fury. They were not just manipulating data. They were actively destroying the future of a defenseless child, labeling his quiet suffering as an attitude problem, all for a fraction of a bonus. Miller, satisfied with the strategic academic fraud, moved on to the next topic, pure financial theft. He pulled out a worn leather ledger. He bragged about his side business, a meticulous, calculated scheme to defraud the school district. He detailed invoicing the school for supplementary educational materials that were never actually purchased or delivered. It's a clean $10,000 every quarter. Miller boasted, tapping the ledger with a manicured nail. No one tracks it in the materials budget. Elara quickly and silently raised her concealed phone. She captured a high-resolution, damning photograph of the open ledger, proof of embezzlement and outright federal financial fraud. The academic corruption was merely the surface. Beneath it lay a network of pure criminal enterprise. Miller slapped the ledger shut. The meeting was over. Elara, keeping her head low, slipped out of the cafe first. The cold night air hit her face. It smelled of rain and pavement, clean and honest, a brutal contrast to the moral sewage she had just ingested. The audio file and the ledger photo were a heavy, searing weight in her pocket. Her fear of exposure had been entirely eclipsed by a cold, absolute determination. This was not a flawed system. This was a sophisticated, successful, criminal enterprise wearing the mask of an esteemed educational institution. The quiet work of the substitute teacher was finished. The war for the soul of the academy was about to begin. Elara drove the modest sedan back across the city. The contrast was immediate and jarring. The school had smelled of cheap tile cleaner and fear. Her office smelled of polished granite and cold, recycled air. She was back in the Thompson Academy executive suite. She sat in her oversized leather chair, the luxurious material feeling utterly foreign and uncomfortable against her worn substitute clothes. She was surrounded by millions of dollars of infrastructure, yet she felt entirely small. She pulled up the audio files and the photo of the fraudulent ledger on her immense desktop screen. She played the recordings again. The chilling laughter of Thompson and Miller echoed in the sterile silence of the room. The bright, sharp, fluorescent light of the office, which once felt empowering, now felt accusatory. It illuminated not her success, but her blindness. She was home, but she was trapped. The massive oak table in the executive conference room felt like an iceberg, cold, imposing, and distant from the reality Elara had just left. She was on a secure video line with Marcus Thorne, the corporation's chief legal counsel. Thorne's image was crisp, his face unreadable. He was the guardian of the empire, and Elara was about to tell him the empire was built on quicksand. Marcus. Elara began, her voice steady, professional, masking the deep seismic shock she felt. I'm initiating an emergency internal investigation. We have substantial evidence of academic fraud, embezzlement, and systematic workplace harassment at the Thompson Academy inner-city campus. She laid out the facts quickly, clinically, the fraudulent ledger photo, the recorded conversation detailing the incomplete grade scheme, the creation of Liam as a scapegoat. Thorne listened without interruption, his gaze fixed, absorbing the cold, hard numbers of the crime. When she finished, the silence stretched heavy and dangerous. Elara. Thorne finally said, his voice flat. You understand the scope of this. This is not internal misconduct. This is federal fraud. More importantly, you were undercover in a non-consensual recording state. Elara corrected him instantly, the legal detail a small shield against the crushing weight of the conspiracy. Michigan is a one-party consent state. The recordings are legal. However, the media fallout when we expose this, the damage to our public trust, will be unprecedented. Thorne leaned forward, his face filling the screen. Damage is an understatement. We protect our metrics for a reason. Investors don't tolerate uncertainty. The moment you expose a systemic failure like this, every competitor, every regulator, and every ambulance-chasing lawyer will descend. We are opening ourselves to a mass tort lawsuit from every student whose future was compromised by Thompson. He presented the calculated risk. The legal team's strategy was to contain and quietly eliminate the threat, fire Thompson and Miller, pay confidential settlements, and issue a boilerplate statement about isolated incidents. It was the corporate way, the easy, survivable way. That's not an option, Elara stated, her voice hardening. We cannot bury this. We cannot pay silence money. If we hide this, we are complicit. We become Miller and Thompson. Thorne challenged her with the brutal clarity of corporate law. You built this company on trust, Elara, but the public loves a good betrayal story. They will ask, where was the CEO while this child was being destroyed? You will be accused of turning a blind eye for profit. The media will tear your personal legacy apart. Elara stared at her reflection in the dark screen, the face of Vance, the substitute teacher, superimposed over the determined features of the CEO. She had seen Liam's fear. She had heard the cynical laughter of the exploiters. The cost was immaterial. My legacy can burn, Marcus. She said the words heavy with finality. But the system cannot survive. We are going public. I want full disclosure. I want Thompson and Miller immediately investigated for federal wire fraud. I want the school board fully notified tonight. We are choosing justice over survival. Prepare for war. Thorne sighed, the sound resigned. He knew the fight was already lost, not to the criminals, but to Elara's reawakened moral compass. War it is, Elara, but you have 24 hours to prepare your shield. They will come for your heart first. The screen went dark. Elara was alone. She had signed the death warrant for the old system, and the noise of the coming battle was already deafening in her mind. Elara dismissed her legal team, the video screen going dark. She stood walking to the immense window overlooking the city, a view she used to mistake for command. She pulled out the tiny, worn student notebook she'd carried as Miss Vance. She began to write, her pen scratching against the paper, not for the investors, not for the media, but for herself. It was an inventory of her own failure. I built this place on numbers, she wrote, her mind articulating the internal monologue. I believed the metrics would save us. They were clean. They were measurable. They told me everything was right. The paper blurred slightly. She pressed harder. But numbers lie. They lied while Liam was crying in the bathroom. They lied while Mr. Chen feared for his job. I was obsessed with the growth rate and I lost sight of the human cost. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. She realized she had become the very thing she swore to fight against, the distant, comfortable executive complicit in the system of exploitation by simple negligence. Her success had been built on a foundation of silence. My failure is not that I allowed the corruption, she concluded, the pen stopping. My failure is that I stopped looking for it. I became satisfied with the metrics, and for that, I am truly sorry. The simple act of writing, of admitting fault, was the first step toward the brutal, necessary war ahead. The time for reflection was over. The time for action was now. Elara closed the notebook, the remorse solidified into cold, surgical resolve. She was no longer Elara Vance, the powerless substitute, nor the blinded CEO. She was the General of Justice. She used her secure corporate line to assemble her war council, a hand-picked team of 2 elite corporate security officers and a forensic IT specialist. They were to convene at the inner-city campus in 6 hours, moving under absolute radio silence. The goal was precise, absolute control and swift legal execution. Elara dictated the strategy with precise, emotionless clarity. The confrontation would not be private. It would happen during the most public forum possible, the mandatory parent-teacher conference. We need the audience, the witnesses, and the victims present, she instructed the empty room. We will shatter the illusion in front of everyone who suffered under it. She finalized the orders. Thompson and Miller were to be detained. Immediately upon the reveal, no excuses, no escape. The system required a shock to the heart to live again. Elara took one last look at the pristine, untouched report on her screen, the one declaring outstanding performance. She was going to burn it all down to save the soul of her company. The inner-city campus auditorium was hot, saturated with the low, nervous hum of anticipation. It was the night of the mandatory parent-teacher conference. The air was thick with the scent of cheap cologne and the faint, sweet perfume of worried hope. The fluorescent lights were too harsh, casting sharp, revealing shadows across the faces in the audience. Parents, some exhausted from double shifts, some dressed in clothes carefully pressed for the occasion, sat in rows. They were here seeking validation for their children. On the small stage, Ms. Thompson and Mr. Miller stood conspicuously near the microphone stand. They were immaculate, radiating an aggressive, false confidence. They were waiting for their last, sickening performance. Elara, having shed her substitute attire for a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, stood near the back entrance. She felt the heavy cold, gold CEO badge in her jacket pocket, a lethal, undeniable counterweapon. Her 2 security officers, blending seamlessly in neutral dark polo shirts, were positioned near the main exits and the stage wings. The silence was palpable. Elara looked out at the faces, the hopeful parents, the anxious teachers, and in the 3rd row, Liam, sitting small and tense next to his designated caseworker, bracing himself for the public humiliation he had come to dread. The stage was set. The audience was captive. Mr. Miller, the regional director, stepped forward to the microphone first. He radiated phony sincerity, delivering a scripted corporate monologue about rigor and accountability. He then smoothly ceded the floor to Ms. Thompson. Thompson took the stage. She smiled, a cold, practiced widening of the lips, and immediately targeted her victims. She announced a new, immediate policy shift. Any unresolved behavioral deficiencies would result in an automatic, non-negotiable deduction from a student's final academic transcript. Her eyes swept the room and locked onto Liam. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. She used Liam as the case study, citing his repeated attitude issues and lack of focus as the reason for the new draconian measure. She was publicly confirming his designation as a necessary failure. Liam flinched, his small body recoiling in the seat. Thompson had successfully delivered her last calculated blow of psychological warfare. The audience murmured a low, uneasy sound of passive disapproval and fear. The stage was cleared for the hero. The low murmur of the audience after Thompson's vicious announcement solidified into passive, impotent anger. They looked down, avoiding eye contact, afraid of being the next target. Thompson, satisfied, turned to Mr. Miller with a triumphant smirk. The performance was nearly over. That was the moment. Elara pushed off the back wall. Her movement was deliberate, unhurried, cutting through the thick silence like a razor. She walked down the aisle toward the stage. She was no longer Miss Vance. Her walk was that of a CEO owning her boardroom. "Actually, Ms. Thompson." Elara's voice was low-controlled, but projected with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I think there's been enough discussion about deficiencies, but they aren't Liam's." Thompson spun around, her smile dissolving into immediate poisonous confusion. "Who are you, the temporary substitute? You are interrupting a sanctioned meeting. Security escort this woman out." Elara stopped directly at the foot of the stage. She did not raise her voice. "My name is Elara Vance, and before your security responds, you should know that I have quite a lot to say." The game was over. Ms. Thompson glared at Elara, her face twisting into venomous rage. "You are trespassing. You are a temporary employee. You have no authority here." Mr. Miller, sensing the catastrophic shift, moved toward the stage exit. Elara didn't flinch. She reached into her suit pocket, pulling out the small, heavy object. The gold CEO badge caught the harsh auditorium light, flashing undeniably. The badge was solid, real, the symbol of absolute power. "I am Elara Vance," she repeated, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Thompson Academy Enterprises, and as the owner of this school, I have all the authority I need." The collective gasp from the audience was a physical wave. Confusion, disbelief, and sudden terrible hope washed over the parents' faces. Elara didn't wait. She raised her phone. "I am not here to accuse Ms. Thompson," Elara continued. "I am here to present evidence." She played the audio file. Thompson's voice, smooth and clinical, filled the room. "He's the perfect target. No guardian to fight back. No money for a lawyer. We can put all the behavior problems on him." The recording then delivered the gut punch, Miller's low chuckle. "That Liam kid is a liability." Liam's small body jerked as he recognized his own betrayal being broadcast. Ms. Thompson's face went from rage to a sickly, panicked white. The sound of her own voice mocking the child was the final, undeniable condemnation. The perfect metrics had shattered. Thompson lunged forward, a desperate, animalistic motion to grab the phone. Miller made a break for the side exit. Elara moved faster. She made a single, sharp gesture. "Security." The two men in neutral shirts moved instantly with the quiet efficiency of trained professionals. One officer blocked Miller at the exit. The other calmly restrained Thompson. Thompson screamed, "You recorded me illegally! You can't do this!" Elara stepped onto the stage, claiming the space of authority. "Michigan is a one-party consent state, Ms. Thompson. Perfectly legal. But academic fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy are federal crimes." She turned from the subdued criminals to the stunned audience. Her voice, though commanding, was filled with genuine regret. "Ms. Thompson and Mr. Miller are terminated effective immediately." They are now in the custody of corporate security pending federal investigation. She then looked directly at Liam, who was shaking tears, finally flowing freely. Liam, your character is intact. Your grades are restored. And tonight, you are safe. The audience erupted not in applause but in a cathartic roaring mix of anger and relief. The immediate public justice was delivered. The auditorium air remained thick with the metallic scent of adrenaline and shock. The departure of Thompson and Miller was swift, brutal, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. Elara stood alone on the stage, the gold badge heavy and visible on her suit jacket. The fight against the criminals was won, but the war for the soul of the school was just beginning. She approached the microphone, pushing aside the scripts and manuals Miller had left behind. Her voice, though softer than before, held the unwavering authority of command, mixed with profound personal regret. The individuals responsible for the systemic abuse and fraud have been removed, Elara stated. But their actions were a symptom, not the disease. The disease was my blindness. She looked directly at the parents, at the stunned faces of the remaining teachers, and finally at Liam. I stand before you tonight, not as the CEO who built this system, but as the leader who allowed it to fail. I allowed our pursuit of perfect, beautiful metrics to obscure the truth that every single number represents a human being. I allowed the fear of one person to silence the integrity of many. Elara paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. My systems were designed to measure success, but they failed to measure human decency. I apologize unequivocally for my negligence. For every moment your child felt invisible, for every good teacher who was silenced, and for every time the metrics lied, I take full responsibility. Her apology was not a corporate disclaimer, it was a confession. It pierced the remaining armor of corporate cynicism in the room. This was not a quick fix. This was the painful, necessary admission of fault required for true healing. She turned to her forensic IT specialist, who was already at the stage-side computer. Effective immediately, we are executing a full, deep-level audit of every student file. Every illegally altered grade, every fraudulent behavior report, and every unjust disciplinary action committed by Thompson and Miller is nullified and will be corrected by morning. The teachers and parents exchanged glances. This was real. This was a leader not circling the wagons but actively demolishing the walls of the ivory tower. Elara knew that the financial cost of this internal cleansing would be immense, but the moral cost of not doing it was infinitely greater. The first brick of the flawed system had been removed. The long, arduous process of rebuilding trust, one honest action at a time, had begun. Elara stepped to the edge of the stage, her gaze finding Mr. Chen, the PE teacher, who still stood near the back. His face was a mixture of relief and disbelief. She spoke directly to him, her voice carrying the promise of absolute integrity. This system thrived because it relied on the silence of good people, Elara announced. But this victory belongs to those who found the courage to speak. It belongs to Mr. Chen. The audience turned, murmuring in recognition. Elara detailed Chen's quiet heroism, his risk in providing the crucial USB drive, his defense of the students, and the fact that his contract had been systematically targeted for elimination by Thompson. Effective immediately, Elara stated, her voice sharp with finality. Mr. Chen is promoted to Head of Student Affairs and Faculty Integrity. His contract is secured, his salary is adjusted immediately, and he will oversee the implementation of our new ethical standards. Chen, a man of large physical stature, visibly sagged with the relief of a crushing burden lifted. Next, Elara addressed the library. Ms. Li will receive the full retroactive budget she requires for the library. Furthermore, those essential books on critical thinking that were ordered to be boxed up. Elara paused, letting the implication land. They will be unboxed and given the most prominent display in the academy. Elara's message was clear. Courage would be rewarded. Integrity would be the new metric. The cleanup was not just about firing the bad actors, but about publicly exalting the good ones. This was the necessary first step in replacing the toxic culture of fear with a new foundation of trust. Elara stepped down from the stage, ignoring the throng of parents, and walked directly to Liam's row. She knelt, bringing her eyes level with his. The caseworker faded back, allowing the moment of true healing to occur. Liam was no longer shaking. He was quiet, his eyes still red, but the sheer terror that had defined him for months was finally gone, replaced by a tentative, fragile relief. "Liam," Elara said, her voice dropping to a warm, genuine tone. "What happened to you was wrong. It was criminal. And it was not your fault. You spoke the truth, and you paid an unfair price." She gently took his hand. "As of this moment, your record is clean. Your grades are restored. And most importantly, the people who hurt you can never touch you again. You are safe." Liam didn't speak. He looked up at the stage where the bad actors had stood, then back at Elara. A flicker of something new, trust, ignited in his eyes. He then did something profound. He smiled. It was small, wobbly, but utterly genuine. It was the first honest smile Elara had seen on his face. He spoke softly, his voice clear for the first time. I just wanted things to be right." Elara nodded. "And they will be, Liam." She made him an offer that was both protection and empowerment. "I need your help. I need your voice. You understand the system's pain better than anyone. Will you advise me? Will you help us fix this school?" Liam's small nod was instantaneous. He was no longer the isolated victim. He was a consultant for change, a critical voice in the school's reformation. The scene shifted to the school's library, now an impromptu war room. Elara gathered the remaining loyal staff, Mr. Chen, Ms. Lee, and Liam. Elara was relentless. "We need to ensure this can never happen again. Not just by firing people, but by dismantling the mechanism of silence." Her solution was immediate and revolutionary: the creation of a Student-Teacher Ethics Council. This body, composed of elected students, including Liam, and trusted teachers, led by Chen and Lee, would have direct weekly access to the CEO's office. "No more hidden folders. No more archival review," Elara declared. "The council will act as an early warning system, completely independent of the existing administration. They will have the authority to bypass the principal and demand an immediate audit. No retaliation will be tolerated." This decentralized power structure was the true systemic fix. Elara was giving the power, the gold badge of internal vigilance, back to the people on the ground. She was replacing the culture of fear with a new structure of mutual accountability. Elara addressed the newly formed council and the gathered faculty one last time. She was no longer apologizing. She was delivering a mandate. "We will change how we measure success here," she stated, her voice resonating with conviction. "We are moving away from the tyranny of the perfect metric." She decreed that teacher evaluations and subsequent bonuses would be tied primarily to student personal growth scores and teacher-student trust metrics data gathered through anonymous external surveys. "We will judge you not on how few failures you report, but on how many struggling students you lift up," she finalized. Leadership is not about commanding from the top. It is about protecting and serving the people at the bottom. "We are here to serve these children's growth, not our own ambition." Elara had completed the transformation from the CEO of metrics to the CEO of morality. The final phase of healing the dissemination of this new radical philosophy was about to begin. The calendar pages had turned 3 times since the night of the parent-teacher conference. The fear that had once suffocated Thompson Academy had evaporated, replaced by the fragile, vibrant energy of possibility. The true testament to this change stood in the newly formed Student-Teacher Ethics Council room. Liam was there. He was no longer the small, shrinking boy Elara had found hiding by the counseling office. He stood tall, his posture straight, his eyes clear and direct. He was presenting his new initiative, the Safe Reporting System. His voice, once a whisper of terror, was now clear and confident. "The system is simple," Liam explained to the attentive group of teachers and students. "It's not about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about creating a door that anyone can open without fear." Elara watched him, her eyes tracing the lines of his transformation. The sight was more moving than any perfect metric ever could be. Liam hadn't just recovered, he had flourished. He had channeled his trauma into a powerful constructive force. He was no longer defined by the cruelty inflicted upon him, but by the courage he had found to speak the truth. In that quiet room, filled with the soft light of genuine collaboration, Elara knew the change was fundamental. The school had birthed its own hero. Liam, the victim of the flawed system, was now the architect of its salvation. The cleanup was complete, but Elara's mission was not. She was haunted by the knowledge that Thompson Academy was not unique. The corruption was merely better hidden elsewhere. She looked beyond her own walls. Elara convened a special meeting with her highest-ranking corporate advisors. She outlined her new radical initiative, the Ethical School Certification. "The industry needs a moral compass," Elara declared, standing before a screen that no longer displayed profit margins, but a simple, bold logo for the certification. "We cannot rely on self-reported metrics. We will create an independent standard." The certification required rigorous, unannounced audits focused entirely on teacher-student trust, psychological safety scores, and the integrity of the reporting system. Any school, public or private, that achieved this certification would earn a powerful marketing tool, the trust of parents. Her advisors were hesitant, citing the immense financial and regulatory complexity. But Elara was immovable. "We are setting the standard. Other institutions will have 2 choices: follow our lead and invest in integrity, or be exposed as morally bankrupt." This initiative, born from the anguish of one crying student, transcended the Academy's boundaries. It was Elara's final systemic act of contrition, transforming her own catastrophic failure into a legacy of accountability for the entire educational landscape. 6 months later, Elara stood on the immense stage of the National Education Summit. The room was packed with superintendents, deans, and CEOs, the elite of American education. She was introduced not as the CEO with the perfect metrics, but as the leader who survived a crisis of integrity. The air was electric. Elara didn't deliver a corporate speech. She told a story. She spoke of the low hum of the server room and the high, desperate sound of Liam crying. She detailed the arrogance of Thompson and Miller and her own complicity in the ivory tower. "Real leadership isn't about commanding from above," Elara announced, her voice strong and clear. "It's about listening from below. It's about recognizing that the people closest to the pain, the students and the dedicated teachers, are closest to the solution." She held up the gold CEO badge. "This is a symbol of power. I once used it to maintain a false silence. Now I use it to protect the truth." She called for the immediate industry-wide adoption of the Ethical School Certification. The response was not cautious applause, but a thunderous standing ovation, a cathartic release of collective guilt and a powerful endorsement of change. After her keynote, Elara was greeted backstage by a man whose face was familiar from news reports. Marcus Thompson, the CEO who had gone undercover in his retail chain. He looked at her with immediate, profound recognition. "I know that silence," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I heard it in the janitor's closet. You heard it in the counseling office. It's the sound of a system designed to look clean while it's crushing the innocent." They talked not as competitors, but as allies in systemic reform. They discussed the frightening parallelism of their experiences, the same reliance on fraudulent metrics, the same cynical exploitation of the vulnerable, a mother needing insurance, a child needing a clean record. They forged an immediate, powerful alliance, the Coalition for Corporate Accountability. Their mission to share their undercover strategies, push for national legislation to strengthen whistleblower protections, and expand the verified ethics model into retail and healthcare. The fight was no longer local. It was a movement. Elara stood one last time at the window of her executive suite. The city lights sparkled, no longer accusing, but simply present. The system was better, but she knew the fight was never truly over. The image of Liam presenting his safe reporting system with confidence was her enduring metric. Her final thought was a direct address to the unseen listener, the voice of the audience. "The truth is simple: power corrupts and silence enables. I built a system that failed. I watched a child suffer for my own negligence, and I learned that the most dangerous thing a leader can do is stop looking for the truth." She paused, letting the emotions settle. The child crying in the counseling office could be in your organization right now. So here is my challenge. When was the last time you truly listened to the most vulnerable person in your company? When did you put your badge down and look where the lights don't shine? Do not wait for the catastrophic failure. Do not wait for the gold badge. Use the power you have right now to protect the integrity, the decency, and the humanity of the people you serve. The solution is not more metrics. It's more courage. The scene fades, leaving the challenge hanging heavy in the air.